Hey, and welcome to this week's coaching video. For those of you who are going to be facilitating the discussion in your off-campus small groups, this video is designed to help equip you and get you ready to lead that discussion. This video goes with the small group handout that accompanies the March 23rd sermon. So go ahead and grab that handout. I'm going to be talking through it with you. You can make some notes on your handout as you go along, and that'll help you in your small group time as you're facilitating the discussion. So let's grab that handout and let's look at it together. This week's message talks about how we belong not just to God, but we belong to God's people. The point of the message is, since we all belong to the same God, we also belong to one another. Since God is our Father, that makes us spiritual brothers and sisters in Christ. Therefore, we belong to one another. And this discussion guide takes us a little bit further in that discussion. On Sunday, we're going to talk about those who have chosen to identify with the church, belong to the church, and be counted in that number. And this discussion talks about really what we ought to experience as a result of that. If I belong to the church, if I've made that commitment, then what ought I experience as a result of that? So that's what you're going to be talking about here, okay? Look at your handout. Discussion point number 1 is a recap point. So if you're in the church, if you're in the worship service, and if you're listening, then this ought to be an easy discussion point. And as the one facilitating the discussion, as always, I encourage you to take notes, write things down, because you're going to be the one who has to kind of get this ball rolling. All right? So if you're at this discussion point and you say, hey, let's talk about what we heard Sunday, and no one has any notes with them, no one's brought anything, they're not really all that prepared. If you are also unprepared for that, then it's going to make it difficult. So you be ready. You write some things down. You listen as the sermon's being preached, and if there's a thought that's kind of thought-provoking, write it down and be ready to discuss that with your group. But that's what discussion point number 1 is all about. It's just kind of getting everybody's mind back into the, into what they heard on Sunday and talking about all of that, which will help the rest of this discussion. Discussion point number 2. Look at this. It says, what are some groups or organizations that you belong to, ones that you chose to belong to, in the sense that there's a list and your name is on it? Now, that's kind of an interesting question. I was thinking about the different groups that I belong to, that my name is on their list. And that list ranges from anything, maybe a group of alumni to maybe a school you attended. It could be something that you pay for, like your electric bill or your cable service or dish service or whatever. Then you have other lists that you've chosen to belong to that are more recreational. I'm on a list right now of a bunch of names in a where we've kind of tried to pick the basketball brackets for the tournament. I'm on that list. There are all kinds of lists that my name is on that I belong to in kind of a formal capacity. The church would be one of those as well. Look at the question that's on discussion point number 2. What made you join that group? Why did you join that group? Why did you sign up for that one? Now, some of those, electricity, water, all that, we sign up for those really more out of necessity. Other groups that we sign up for, like a tournament challenge, a bracket challenge, we do that because we enjoy it. But ultimately, in all of these, probably the answer to this question is we realize that there's a value in belonging to that particular group or that particular organization, whatever it may be. There's a value in it. That's why we signed up. And that's really what we're getting at here. Look at discussion point number 3. It says, it seems that we have a God-given desire to belong. That does. It seems to be an 8, doesn't it? That we instinctively want to belong to certain groups or certain things. It says, talk about how this desire can go good. Talk about how it can go bad. Just really talk that out with your group. On the bad side, think about this. This is why some people, not just teenagers, but even older, this is why some people will get in with a bad crowd, the wrong crowd that brings them into some destructive lifestyles. That's one way that our God-given desire to belong can go bad. We can end up saying, I want to belong so bad, I'm going to belong to anybody who will receive me. That's one way it can go bad. Now, on the other hand, how it can go good, there are groups, I would say it's good to belong, or that can go good, when we end up belonging to a group where it's mutually beneficial. It's good for me that I belong with them, and it's good for them that I belong with them. That's one way that it can go good. So with all the discussions and all the examples that maybe your group members might throw out there, one way that this can go good is in any context when it's mutually beneficial. That's what I would kind of lock in on if I were you as the group facilitator here. Mutually beneficial. When belonging to a group, when it's mutually beneficial, it's good for me that I belong, it's good for them that I belong, that's when it can go good. And that's going to, I think, make sense as you move through this handout. So I would throw that out there. Discussion point number 4, this talks about the creation account and how when God created everything, you see this wonderful pattern all throughout Genesis 1 where God continues to say, what I made, I'm looking at it and it pleases me. This is good. And you can kind of see there in those verses that it hits that. And I would actually read those Genesis 1 verses. I would point that out. Genesis 1:4, then verse 10 and 12, 18, 21, 25, 31. I would actually point all of those out because it really drives home the point that when God made what he made, when he looked at what he had made, he said, I really like this. This is good. And there's something about hearing it over and over and over and over again from the lips of God that really drives home that point. This is good. This is good. This is good. This is good. But look at discussion point number 4. It says, however, there was one thing that God actually didn't like. And then you read that, Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, and it says that God saw that the man he created was alone, and God said, now this is not good. And that really should stand out the way that it's written there in Genesis. This is good, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good. Now this is not good. And obviously what God saw that wasn't good was that a man was living in isolation. He didn't belong to anyone else, no one like himself. And God said this isn't good. Now look at discussion point number 5. This is really interesting. Keep in mind that what God said here in Genesis 2:18 was before sin entered into the mix. There was no sin in the world yet. Yet God says this isn't good. Now isn't that interesting? In a sinless creation, this is paradise. God says this isn't good. Now the question is there on discussion point number 5, it says discuss that. You talk about that God would say it's not good even though there's no sin. And the follow-up question, what does this tell us about who we are and how God intended for us to exist? And obviously, belonging to one another, belonging to others is fundamental to who we are, how God made us and how God made us to be. We were not designed, even before sin entered into the mix, we were not designed to function in isolation, to live in isolation. It is a good thing to belong. It is a very good thing to belong. God made us this way. And this is why we've joined so many groups of people all throughout our lives, because this is a God-given desire. We were created by God for fellowship with one another. So, move on through your discussion guide here. Discussion point number 6. It says, read Acts chapter 2, verses 38 through 47. Now, what you're going to do right here, you're just going to read that straight through. So, stop right there on that discussion point and just do what it says. Read that passage, which is about the birth of the early church, which we will actually have read that in the worship service. So, you're going to read that Acts chapter 2 passage. Then you're going to go back. It says, look at your notes. It says, read it again. Read it again together, but this time, based specifically on what you see here in this Acts chapter 2 passage, now go back and make a short list of the quote-unquote benefits that we should experience by belonging to the church. So again, here's what you're going to do. You're going to read this Acts chapter 2 passage together one time, then you're going to go back and you're going to read it again. And what you might actually do here in your facilitating of this part, let people do this one on their own. Let them read it a second time and develop their list of benefits all on their own. So don't do this so much as a group experience, but just kind of individuals working through their thing here. Now, I did this myself. And in fact, what you might want to do, you might want to go ahead and try this this little thing now of making your list based on those verses. You might try doing that before you hear me share my list with you. So if you want to, go ahead and hit pause now and do that. Read the Acts passage and then make a list of the benefits of belonging to one another. Go ahead and do that now. Then after you're done, unpause it and let me share with you what I wrote down, okay? So you mark it, set, go. Now, if you've made your list of the benefits of belonging to the body of Christ based on the Acts chapter 2 passage, here's what I wrote down, several things. I came up with 6 things. Number one, I wrote down instruction based on verse 42. When we belong to the church, we're going to learn. We're going to be instructed. You see that in verse 42. I wrote down also, based on verse 42, camaraderie. That when we belong to the church, there's a camaraderie and a very deep sense of camaraderie because it's built around our relationship with God, which is the deepest relationship possible. So there's a deep camaraderie, you might even say. Number three, I wrote this one down based on verse 43, that we live inspired. There's a sense of inspiration that we live with. It says there that everyone was filled with awe. They were filled with a sense of wonder and worship. That's one of the benefits of belonging to the church. And on that note, I would say this, on your daily reading this week, in the book of Ephesians, in chapter 3, Paul does a prayer for the church. You can go back and look at it. This is going to be your Wednesday reading. You can see that on your handout. Paul does a prayer for the church. And pay attention in verse 18, because Paul says, I'm praying that you would grasp how long and wide and great and deep the love of God is. But he says, I pray that you, together with all the saints, would be able to do this. And there's something to be learned in that our connectivity with the body of Christ increases our capability to understand the greatness of the love of God. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but it's true. Those who are in isolation have a limited understanding of the love of God. So back to our list here, based on verse 43, belonging to the church increases our sense of awe or our sense of inspiration with God. The fourth thing on my list, based on verses 44 and 45, our needs get met. I mean, that's a beautiful picture here in the book of Acts. It says in verse 44 specifically that no one went without their daily needs. No one was wanting in that regard. In fact, it says people would just sell some of their possessions and share it with the other people. So when we belong, our needs are met. Based on verse 47, we live with a sense of joy. We're happy. You see that in verse 47 there. People were praising God and enjoying one another. And then finally, number 6 that I wrote down, based on verse 48, is that we live with a sense of purpose. And I'm getting that because it says right there, I said verse 48, I meant verse 47. It says that they were praising God, enjoying the favor of the people, and that God was adding to the number of those who were being saved. And this was a collective effort. So there's this sense of purpose because they're seeing people saved, they're seeing people's sins forgiven. So they live with a sense of purpose. So that's my list. I don't know if it's exactly like your list. There ought to be a lot of overlap. Maybe we use different words here and there. But look at that. I mean, think about it. By belonging to the church, here are the benefits of being on that list, so to speak. We're taught, we're instructed, we have camaraderie, we live with a sense of inspiration and awe, our needs are met, we have a sense of joy and happiness, and we live with a sense of purpose. Man, if that's not a pretty good selling point for why people ought to belong to the church, I don't know what is. But that's the list. So after your group sits down, and maybe give them 3 minutes to do this little exercise, but have everybody come up with their list and then share it together and listen with one another, because some people are going to have like a list of 3 things. Somebody's going to have a list of 7 or 8 or 9 things. So have them share those together, kind of learn from one another in that way. Then look at this, discussion point number 7. It says, as you look at your list, consider these 2 questions. Number 1, are you experiencing these things? Which I think that's the question that we're all naturally going to ask. Am I getting this out of church? But look at the second question. This is very important. Are you the reason that someone else is experiencing these things? That's the question that we often don't think about. See, often when we think of church membership, we think of what am I going to get out of it? And that is part of it. There's a benefit in belonging to the church. But the flip side is, are we contributing to those things that help others experience those benefits? That's a part of it. We belong to the church. That is both, and you see this on discussion point number 8. By the way, discussion point number 7, it's not really a discussion thing. That's just really more of a reflection thing, unless you guys discuss it and have something good to say. But really, that's just a reflection thing. Are you experiencing these things? Are you the reason someone else is experiencing these things? Then that moves to discussion point number 8, which is really also reflection. It says, remember, Because we all belong to the same God, we belong to one another. This is both a privilege and a responsibility. And really, that just kind of brings us back to the sermon for Sunday. It kind of helps to tie a knot on your discussion. You can finish formally by reading your memory verse together and maybe trying to learn it and recite it together. That's always a great way to finish your group time and gives you a real definitive stopping point. All right, but that's your discussion guide here. It's all about belonging. It's all about what it means to belong and the benefits that come with that, and the responsibilities that come with that. I hope that you have experienced these wonderful things that come with belonging to the family of God, and I hope that God's using you to help somebody else experience that same thing. All right? Hey, thanks for facilitating your group time this week. Hopefully this video was helpful to you. God bless you, and we'll see you Sunday.